Okay, so let's talk cutting a piece. Now, you might have heard me talk about the word cutting in some of the other videos that you have watched. Cutting is the process of taking a book or script or something that's this size, very thick, very big, and cutting it down into a 10-minute piece or an 8-minute piece, depending on the event you're doing. Cuttings are going to apply to a couple different events. You're going to need to be doing cuttings for Dramatic Interp, for Humorous Interp, for Duo, for prose, for program oral interp, even for poetry you're going to be cutting. So this is a good skill to have, and it's important to understand what to do and kind of the particulars of doing it. So first things first, you've got to find your source material. You've got to find the book that you're pulling from. In this case, for the example today, I'm using 11/12/63. It's my favorite book from Stephen King. Awesome little adventure. Granted, very thick, big adventure, but definitely a good read. And so in my brain, I've said to myself, I found a really cool cutting from the beginning of this book. There's a cool conversation that I think would make a good piece. So I'm going to walk you through how to do a cutting start to finish using this piece and show you what to do for the different events. So first things first, like I said, you got to get the book. You've got to have that, and you've got to find the section of the book that you think is going to make the good piece. Once you do that, make a photocopy of it because you're going to be marking it up like crazy, and you don't want to mark up the original book. Pro tip, when you're making a photocopy of it from the very beginning of this season, please make a separate copy, a separate clean copy that's not at all marked up, like, clean, nothing on it. Even better, scan it in and turn it into a PDF and just stash that file away, because when it comes time for the state championships in April, the state needs to verify that your piece has come from a legitimate published source. So you need to be able to provide that to them, and you need to provide the uncut version so they can see exactly what you did to cut it up. Sometimes there's complaints that pieces are not cut correctly. So the state has to look at it and say, okay, here's the original and here's their final cut version. What was the process they went through to get that there? And so we need to have this pristine, clean version. So beginning of the season, always good to get that now because I'll be asking for it later in the year. So you photocopy your pages that you think are going to make a good piece. A couple of things you're going to need. Need a regular pen. You're going to need highlighters. So in the section that I have pulled, just a little bit of information here. The premise of this particular book and this particular story is that there's an old guy. His name is Al. He is dying of cancer. And so he's found someone new, a younger guy, that's going to help him in his mission. Al has a secret pantry in his restaurant. And this pantry has a cool secret in the fact that it allows him to travel back to the year 1955. He can stay in 1955 or the subsequent years as long as he wants. Anytime he goes back to this time portal, he will then transfer back to modern time, and only 2 minutes will have lapsed. So the idea of the whole book is that they can go back to 1955, they can undo the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and then reap all the benefits, supposedly, in the future that they think are caused by that. So it's a kind of an interesting book, different, interesting premise. But there's a conversation that happens between Al, the old guy, and Jake, the younger guy, when Al's introducing this whole idea of time travel to him at the beginning of the book. So I have cut out, I've copied this particular chapter. So let's talk about this in terms of dramatic interpretation, humorous interpretation. Granted, it's not a humorous script, but you can kind of get the point for that, or for Duo. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to select a color. So for instance, I'm going to say orange. No, let's do yellow just because it's going to be easier to see. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to start at the beginning of this section and just mark the dialogue. So again, for Dramatic Interp, Humorous Interp, Duo, all you want for these events is the dialogue. You do not want the prose, the narration that goes in between those lines. So this is going to help me see if this is going to work. So for instance, I'm going to go through and I'm going to highlight all the lines that are from Al in yellow. So let's see. Lung cancer. This is an Al line. Now I'm to a Jake line. Jake lines I'm going to do in blue. Let's see. Al, hello. It's June. 7 months ago was December. Okay, so as you can see here, now I have a sense of part 1 and part 2, and granted there'll be a lot more part 2 on the next pages because there's a lot more lines from the Jake character. So now if we're trying to use this as a solo piece, Dramatic Interp, Humorous Interp, what I'm going to have to do is I can say, I'm going to have to do these now as 2 separate voices. This will be voice 1, which I can perform in this voice, and this will be separate, voice number 2, which I can do in more of like my voice. It could make a interesting Dramatic Interp piece with just one person, or we can turn it into a duo. And this is person 1, and this is person 2, and we're having this conversation back and forth with an intriguing plot that's going on with it. So we can get a sense there. So what I'm going to do is I would go through this entire piece, this entire chapter. There's 8 pages to it, already hugely long, and just highlight the dialogue. Once I have that, then I can then start practicing. I'm going to see, first of all, if I'm only doing the dialogue, does the story still make sense without the narration involved? If it does, then I may be good to go. Now, here's the one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're doing these acting events. In Dramatic and Humorous Interp and all of the events, you can say the lines as written, and you can cut out the stuff that you don't need, but you can't add stuff in. So you can't be like, you know what, going from this section to this section, I really need a sentence that says this so that it makes sense. You can't add that in. You can't add words to this author's piece. So if it doesn't work, you're going to need to figure something out so that the story makes sense, but you can't add stuff in. Okay, just making sure that we're clear on that. You can cut stuff out. You can't add stuff back in. It has to stay the author's original words. Now, one thing you can cut out too, I would especially recommend cutting out, are curse words. This is not a state rule. This is a Mr. Barth coaching policy for Marist Catholic High School. I don't like curse words in speeches, even if it's from a literary source. I don't think it's necessary. Kids your age can't go watch an R-rated movie with certain language in it, so why should you be subjected to it in a high school sanctioned activity? That's my opinion. Now, other people in your rounds may be getting away with curse words. That's up to them and their coaches. If I'm watching a speech, if I'm watching a Dramatic Interp, and people drop F-bombs, if people are cursing in there, I automatically knock them forth. I don't think it's appropriate, and I think that people need to learn that it's not appropriate in a high school activity. You, as Marist students, should definitely not be cursing in your speeches. So if you see curse words, just cuts them right out. Not necessary. Okay. So again, I'm now have my list of dialogue. I can determine if this is going to work as a piece. Once I've outlined all of the dialogue, I can start practicing it and seeing how long it is. If it's more than 10 minutes, you're going to have to cut it back. And that's when your pen's going to come in handy and you'll be like, all right, which lines are most important to tell the story? So as I'm reading through, okay, this section here, nope. It really doesn't add anything to the story. So I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to go straight from this section here to this one here. And so this is what we call cutting. We're cutting it down until it's in a nice, easy way to work with, and it fits within our either 8 or 10 minute time frame. So that's a quick look. Again, you can cut stuff out, especially cut out the narration, but you can't add stuff into it. So again, Dramatic Interp, Humorous Interp, Duo, that's how this works. Now let's cut for prose, because prose is going to be a little bit different. Prose is about the narration. It's also about the voices, so I can do the same thing. I can go through and say, all right, here's Al, blah, 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 blah. Here's Al all in here. Al's going to be down in here. Blah, 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 blah. Here's Jake. Okay. But in prose, you can do the narration. Prose is about the narration. So it's a little bit tougher to cut because you have a lot more resources to work with. But now we're going to say, all right, this color, the orange color, this is the narration that I want to include. You can actually say, you can go from the Al character, lung cancer, oh yeah, I have it, to, I thought of telling him that his math has to be wrong. You get the point. You can have narration in prose. That's the point of prose. So figure out exactly which narration works to help tell that story and where the voices are. And again, with prose, cut stuff out. That's why it's called a cutting. You can't add stuff back in, but you have more resources to tell the story in prose. And 2 less minutes, it's an 8-minute speech. So that way, that's how you're going to cut for prose. So dialogue only for Dramatic Interp, Humorous Interp, Duo. Dialogue and narration for prose. And that is how you cut. Cut stuff out till you make the time. Don't add stuff back. Don't add your own words back. Everything comes from the author. So cut your piece, get it ready, do the best you can. Again, when you go to state, we're going to need the original that's nice and clean. I'm going to need your cut version so we can see exactly how you cut it. And all that's going to have to be submitted to the state. So make sure you keep these with you somewhere. So that's how you cut an acting piece. Again, let me know if you have any questions as your coach. I'll be listening to your cut pieces. I'll be helping you perform them. But in the meantime, this is what you can do to get ready to go.